Welcome to the frozen heights of the Grand Hotel Weissflue, where the blizzard howls like a vengeful spirit and secrets lie buried in eternal snow. At dawn, Sir Geoffrey Marchmont is found on the terrace, upright, encased in rime, eyes wide in eternal horror, a crimson rose clasped in his frozen hands. No footprints mar the pristine white expanse. No way in, no way out. As Hercule Poirot sips his chocolate, the mountain whispers its deadly riddle. Who brought death on silent skis? The game begins. The snow keeps its counsel. But Poirot's grey cells never freeze. Chapter 1. The Corpse in Crystal. The wind came down from the Weissflue like a living thing, a white serpent that coiled around the Grand Hotel Weissflue and hissed through every crack in its century-old timbers. At 3,117 meters above the sea, the air was so thin that a man's thoughts seemed to float away from him, light as the snowflakes that danced in the floodlights of the terrace. It was the sort of night when even the stars appeared frozen, pinned to the velvet sky by the cold. Inside the hotel, the great chandelier of Bohemian crystal trembled with each gust, scattering fractured rainbows across the parquet floor. The fire in the marble hearth roared like a caged lion, yet the warmth reached only a few feet before the Alpine night devoured it. The guests, those few who had chosen to winter in this area of luxury, clustered near the flames like moths, their faces pale, their eyes reflecting the same uneasy question. Who among us will be next? Hercule Poirot sat apart, in a high-backed chair of carved walnut, a cup of thick Swiss chocolate cooling between his gloved hands. He had arrived only that afternoon, summoned by a telegram that had reached him in Brussels with the urgency of a scream. Marchmont in danger. Come at once. Trust no one. H. The signature was a single initial, but Poirot knew the hand. Sir Geoffrey Marchmont, baronet, steel magnate, and, though few suspected it, guardian of certain documents that could unmake governments. Poirot had met him once in the smoking room of the Orient Express, where Marchmont had spoken in riddles about debts that cannot be paid in gold and roses that bloom in winter. At the time, Poirot had dismissed it as the melancholy of a rich man. Now he was not so sure. The scream came at 3:30 in the morning, thin and high, slicing through the wind like a scalpel. It was not the wind. Poirot knew the difference. He set down his cup with exquisite care and rose, his small, neat figure dwarfed by the vast room. The other guests stirred like sleepwalkers. A woman in a dressing gown of peach silk, Madame Helena Voss, he recalled, pressed a lace handkerchief to her lips. Colonel Reginald Hawke, late of His Majesty's Indian Army, reached instinctively for the service revolver that was no longer at his hip. Dr. Lucas Brandt, the hotel physician, was already moving towards the French doors that led to the terrace, his face the colour of the snow outside. Poirot followed, his patent leather shoes leaving perfect crescents in the fresh powder that had drifted across the threshold. The terrace was a balcony of the gods, cantilevered over a void of darkness and ice. Beyond the balustrade, the mountain fell away in a series of knife-edge ridges, each one a potential grave. The floodlights cast a merciless white glare, turning the snow into a field of diamonds and revealing the thing that should not have been there. Sir Geoffrey Marchmont sat in a wicker chair that had been dragged from the lounge, his body encased in a shroud of rime. His evening clothes, white tie, tailcoat, the star of some minor order on his breast, were stiff with frost. His gloved hands were clasped in his lap as if in prayer, and between the kid-leather fingers, lay a single crimson rose, its petals so dark they appeared black in the artificial light. The flower was impossibly fresh, its stem still supple, a bead of moisture trembling at the cut end like a tear. Most terrible of all were his eyes. They stared straight ahead, wide and unblinking, the pupils dilated to pinpricks. The irises, once a pale blue, had filmed over with ice, yet they seemed to follow Poirot as he approached, as if the dead man still watched at the living with the intensity of a hawk. Inspector Gruber of the Kantonspolizei arrived minutes later, stamping snow from his boots and cursing in Schweizerdeutsch. He was a broad man with a moustache like a broom, and the permanent squint of one who spends his life staring into blizzards. He took one look at the corpse and crossed himself, though whether from piety or superstition, Poirot could not tell. "Mein Gott," Gruber muttered, "no footprints. The terrace was swept at midnight by the night porter. I watched him myself. And the snow since then, look, it is undisturbed except where we stand." Poirot knelt, his knees creaking in the cold. The snow was indeed virgin, a smooth expanse, broken only by the faint depression where the chair legs had settled. No mark led to the body, none led away. It was as if Marchmont had been placed there by the hand of God or the devil. "Observe," Poirot said softly, his breath pluming in the air. "The rose! It is a Rosa centifolia, the cabbage rose, not native to these altitudes, and it is fresh. Someone brought it here within the last hour. Someone who knew Sir Geoffrey's terror of roses." Gruber frowned. "Terror? Oui. In 1928, in the gardens of Versailles, Sir Geoffrey's first wife died of a rose-thorn poisoned with curare. He never spoke of it, but the fear remained. A man who carries such a memory does not forget." The inspector shivered, though whether from cold or unease was unclear. "Then this is murder, without doubt, but murder most elaborate. The body is frozen solid, yet rigor mortis has not fully set in. He died elsewhere within the hotel, and was brought here post-mortem. The question is, why?" They carried the corpse inside on a makeshift stretcher of skis and velvet cushions. The lounge, which moments before had been a haven, now felt like a mausoleum. The fire hissed as melting ice dripped from Marchmont's coat. The rose was placed carefully on a silver salver, its petals already beginning to bruise where the frost had kissed them. Poirot stood over the body, his eyes moving with the precision of a watchmaker. Marchmont's face was contorted in an expression that was not quite fear, not quite surprise, something in between, as if he had seen his killer and recognized an old acquaintance. There was a faint bluish tinge to the lips, but no froth, no sign of asphyxiation. The hands were clenched so tightly that the kid leather had split along the seams. With delicate fingers, Poirot eased open the right glove. Beneath, the skin was unmarked, save for a tiny puncture on the web between thumb and forefinger. A pinprick, no more, but fresh. He sniffed delicately, nothing. Then, from the cuff of the sleeve, he drew forth a scrap of vellum, no larger than a postage stamp. It was stiff with cold, but the ink was still legible. A signature, G. Marchmont, and beneath it a date, 15th of November, 1919. Poirot's moustaches twitched. The Treaty of Versailles was signed in June of that year, but the annexes, the secret clauses, were negotiated later, in absolute secrecy. This is a fragment of one such clause, worth a fortune, or a coffin. He turned to the assembled suspects, who had gathered like crows around a battlefield. There were 5 of them, each distinct, each carrying the weight of their own secrets. Dr. Lucas Brandt stood nearest the fire. his spectacles reflecting the flames so that his eyes appeared empty. He was a thin man in his 40s, with the precise movements of a surgeon and the pallor of one who spends too much time indoors. His hands, Poirot noted, were steady, too steady. Madame Helena Voss had thrown a sable coat over her nightgown, but the fur did little to hide the tremor in her limbs. She was beautiful in the way of a winter storm. Dark hair, pale skin, eyes the color of glacier ice. A diamond brooch, shaped like a rose, glittered at her throat, and Poirot wondered if the choice was deliberate. Colonel Reginald Hawke had dressed hastily in tweeds and brogues, his military bearing undiminished by the hour. His face was weathered by sun and sand, but the eyes were sharp, assessing. He held a pipe in one hand, the bowl still warm, and the scent of Latakia tobacco hung heavy in the air. Fräulein Ingrid Keller, Marchmont's secretary, clutched a leather folio to her chest as if it were a shield. She was young, no more than 25, with the kind of blonde prettiness that fades quickly in harsh light. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but whether from grief or guilt Poirot could not yet tell. Karl Reiter, the mountain guide, leaned against the doorframe with the lazy grace of a wolf. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with a beard crusted with ice and eyes the colour of slate. His hands were calloused, the knuckles scarred from years of gripping ice axes and ropes. He watched Poirot with the wariness of a man who had spent his life looking over his shoulder. Poirot addressed them all, his voice soft but carrying to the furthest corner of the room. Mesdames et messieurs, we are isolated. The funicular is buried under 3 meters of snow. The telephones are dead. The passes are closed until spring. We are, as the English say, in the same boat, but one of us is the captain of a very different vessel, the ship of death. He held up the scrap of vellum. This is why Sir Geoffrey died. Someone in this room wanted it, or wanted to silence the man who carried it. The rose was a message, the frozen tableau, a signature, but signatures can be forged and messages misinterpreted. Hercule Poirot will read between the lines. Dr. Brandt cleared his throat. Sir Geoffrey was diabetic, monsieur. He required insulin twice daily. I administered his evening dose at 9 o'clock. He was alive and well, or as well as a man in his condition could be. Poirot's eyes glittered, and yet dead by dawn. Tell me, doctor, where do you keep your insulin? In the surgery, locked in a refrigerated cabinet. The key is on my person at all times. May I see it? Brandt hesitated, then drew a small brass key from his waistcoat pocket. Poirot examined it closely, then returned it with a nod. And the dose you gave him, how much? 10 units, as prescribed. Enough to kill a healthy man? Brandt's lips thinned. In overdose, yes, but I measured it myself. Poirot turned to Fräulein Keller. And you, mademoiselle, you were his secretary. You knew his habits, his fears. Did he mention roses? Did he speak of the White Lady? Keller's knuckles widened on the folio. He had nightmares. He said she came to him in dreams, all in white, with roses in her hair. He was writing a new will. He wanted to leave everything to a sanatorium in Zurich. Brandt flinched as if struck. Madame Voss laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Geoffrey was always theatrical. The White Lady is a local legend, a woman who threw herself from the Weissflurjoch in 1789 after her lover betrayed her. They say she lures faithless men to their deaths. Childish superstition. Colonel Hawke knocked out his pipe against the hearth. Superstition be damned. The man was poisoned. I smelled bitter almonds on his breath. Poirot leaned close to the corpse's lips. Nothing. He straightened. "Bitter almonds, mon colonel, are also the scent of certain pipe tobaccos, like yours." Hawke's face darkened, but he said nothing. Carl Reiter pushed away from the doorframe. "The terrace is exposed. Anyone could have dragged him out there. But the snow? How do you explain the snow?" Poirot smiled, a small, cat-like smile. "That, mon ami, is the fascination. No footprints, no drag marks. Only the chair, the body, and the rose. It is a puzzle worthy of the Sphinx." He moved to the French doors and opened them again. The wind rushed in, scattering snow across the carpet like salt. Poirot stepped onto the terrace, his footprints crisp and clear. He walked to the spot where the chair had been, then turned and walked back, carefully placing each foot in the same prints. When he reached the door, he beckoned to Gruber. "Observe, one set of prints going out, one set returning, but if I were to walk backwards into my own prints, then step aside onto skis." He demonstrated, shuffling backward with mincing steps until he reached the balustrade. "Voila! The illusion is complete." Gruber scratched his head. "But the chair, it weighs 20 kilos at least. With a sled or a luggage trolley from the corridor, it is child's play. The snow would cover the wheels, and the body rigor is incomplete. He could be posed like a tailor's dummy." Inside, the suspects watched in silence. Poirot closed the doors and brushed snow from his coat. But this is only the beginning. The rose did not walk here by itself. Someone cut it, carried it, placed it in frozen fingers. Someone who knew the legend, knew the fear, knew the value of that scrap of vellum. He held up the rose. A single petal detached and fluttered to the floor like a drop of blood. "Tomorrow," Poirot said, "we will search the hotel. Every room, every cupboard, every heart. The killer is among us, and the snow keeps his secret, for now." But as the fire settled into embers and the guests dispersed to their rooms, Poirot lingered by the corpse. He opened Marchmont's left hand, which had been clenched so tightly that the glove had split. Inside was another scrap of vellum, smaller than the first, folded into a square no larger than a fingernail. Poirot unfolded it with tweezers. It was a map, hand-drawn, in Marchmont's spidery script. A route from the hotel to a point marked with a tiny rose. Beneath it, a single word, cash. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The game, as the English said, was afoot. And somewhere in the hotel, a clock struck 4, its chimes muffled by the snow, but carrying with them the promise of revelation and retribution. Chapter 2. The Treaty of Ghosts. Poirot did not sleep. While the hotel settled into the uneasy hush of a house that has tasted death, he moved through its arteries like a quiet pulse. The corridors were panelled in dark walnut, the sconces dimmed to embers, and every footfall echoed twice, once in the present, once in memory. He carried a small electric torch, its beam a silver needle stitching shadow to shadow. First, the surgery. Dr. Brandt had retired with the key still on its chain, but locks are conversations, and Poirot was fluent. A strip of celluloid from his cigarette case, a gentle persuasion, and the cabinet side open. Inside, rows of glass ampoules, each labelled in Brandt's meticulous hand. Insulin, 100 units per cc. One vial showed a fingerprint smudge on the rubber stopper, fresh. Poirot pocketed it. Next, the greenhouse. The hotel's pride, a glass blister on the southern slope, heated by geothermal pipes. The door was locked, but the key hung on a nail labelled Gewächshaus, greenhouse. Inside, the air was humid, almost tropical, a shock after the corridor's chill. Orchids drooped like exhausted courtiers, lemon trees perfumed the darkness, and roses, dozens of them, hybrid teas and floribundas, their blooms heavy with scent. But one bed was ravaged. Earth scattered, stems snapped, a single crimson petal crushed underfoot. Poirot knelt. The soil was damp, almost muddy. He touched it, warm. Someone had watered recently, lavishly, in winter, in a blizzard. He found the broken hypodermic beneath a shattered pot. The needle bent, the plunger jammed at the 10 CTC mark. Insulin residue clouded the barrel. He wrapped it in his handkerchief. Back in the lounge, the fire had burned to coals. Poirot rebuilt it with practiced economy, then spread his finds on the marquetry table. The vellum fragment, the map, the ampule, the needle, the petal. He arranged them like tarot cards. The clock on the mantel ticked with the patience of glaciers. At 5:30, Fräulein Keller appeared, wrapped in a camel hair coat 2 sizes too large. Marchmont's, no doubt. Her eyes were swollen, but her voice steady. "I couldn't sleep. He kept a diary. I thought you should see it." She produced a small Morocco-bound book from the folio she still clutched like a hymnal. Poirot took it reverently. The entries were in Marchmont's crabbed hand, the ink alternately violet and black. 10 Jan. E demands the Paris letters. Says she will sell them to the Völkische Beobachter if I refuse. Must destroy the annex. 12 Jan. Saw her on the ridge again. White gown, roses in her hair. The altitude plays tricks. 14 Jan. Brandt increases the insulin. Says my sugar is erratic. Feel strange. Hands tremble. The rose in the conservatory bloomed blood red today. Impossible. 15 Jan. Rewriting the will. The sanatorium must have everything. Ingrid will understand. The final entry, dated yesterday. They are all closing in. The treaty is my shield and my noose. If I burn it, they win. If I keep it, I die. The White Lady waits. Poirot closed the diary. Mademoiselle, this sanatorium, it is Dr. Brandt's clinic in Zurich. She nodded. He saved my brother's life after the war. Sir Geoffrey promised to fund it fully. Then he changed his mind. Changed how? He said the money was tied up in the treaty, that if it surfaced, everything would be lost. Poirot's gaze drifted to the French doors. Dawn was a pale bruise on the horizon, the snow still falling in slow, deliberate flakes. And the roses? Did he fear them always? Only after his wife died. He banned them from the house. But here, she gestured toward the greenhouse. He insisted on the conservatory, said he needed to face the devil. At 6, the others assembled for coffee. Madame Voss in a dressing gown of crimson silk, the colour of arterial blood. Colonel Hawke in full tweeds, as if for a shoot. Karl Reiter, smelling of pine and kerosene. Dr. Brandt last, his face grey, the keychain glinting at his waist. Poirot waited until the cups were filled, then laid the diary on the table like a gauntlet. Sir Geoffrey was poisoned, he announced. Not by cyanide. Colonel, your pipe tobacco misled us, but by insulin. A massive overdose, administered between 9 and midnight. The puncture is here. He indicated the web of the corpse's hand, now thawed and livid. Posterior deltoid would have been easier, but the killer chose a spot visible only when the glove was removed. A message, perhaps. Brandt set down his cup with a clatter. I gave him 10 units at 9, measured precisely. Yet this needle held 10 times that amount, and your cabinet was opened last night. Impossible. The key never leaves me. Poirot produced the smudged ampule. Your fingerprint, Doctor, on a vial that should be full. Brandt stared as if it were a scorpion. I checked his levels at 11. He was restless. Perhaps I prepared a second dose and forgot. Forgot? Poirot's voice was silk over steel. You, who measure life in minims. Madame Voss lit a cigarette with a hand that did not shake. Geoffrey was suicidal. He spoke of ending it in the snow. Perhaps he took the insulin himself. Poirot turned to her. Madame, you knew him in Paris. You knew the treaty's value. Did you also know where he hid the full document? Her eyes flicked to the diary, then away. He trusted no one, not even me. Colonel Hawke cleared his throat. The treaty is a myth. Marchmont was a bankrupt fantasist. I came to buy his steelworks, nothing more. Poirot smiled. Yet you carry Foreign Office credentials, mon colonel, and your pipe tobacco masks the scent of bitter almonds, convenient for a man who wishes to plant suggestions. Hawke's jaw tightened. I've killed men for less. But not this one, not yet. Carl Reiter spoke for the first time, his voice a gravel avalanche. The funicular is blocked. Avalanche on the lower slope. No one leaves until April. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Convenient. Who reported this avalanche, Herr Reiter? The station master at Cloisters. By radio. Yet the hotel's radio is in the manager's office, locked, and the manager is in Davos with appendicitis. Reiter shrugged. I have my own set, for guiding. Of course. Poirot gathered his evidence. We have motives, money, revenge, patriotism, love. We have means, insulin, access, knowledge of the legend. We have opportunity, a locked hotel, a blizzard, a man who feared roses above all things. Held up the tiny map. And we have this, a cache, somewhere on the mountain. Sir Geoffrey intended to retrieve something tonight, before he died. Perhaps the full treaty, perhaps proof, perhaps his salvation. He folded the map and slipped it into his waistcoat. Today we search. The greenhouse, the cellars, the attics. The killer has left traces, and Hercule Poirot will follow them like breadcrumbs in the snow. But as the party dispersed, Poirot lingered by the corpse. He opened Marchmont's waistcoat and found sewn into the lining a second map, identical but with a different mark, a tiny cross. And beneath it, in Marchmont's hand, if I die, trust P. Poirot's heart quickened. The game had deepened. Outside, the blizzard redoubled, erasing the world beyond the windows. Inside, the hunt began. And in the greenhouse, unseen, a single rosebud tightened, its petals darkening from pink to the colour of fresh blood. Chapter 3. The Avalanche Lie. The hotel woke to a world erased. Snow pressed against the windows like a living shroud, muffling sound until the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to tick inside one's skull. Breakfast was a silent affair. Black coffee, rye bread, the faint metallic taste of fear. Poirot presided at the head of the table, his small figure immaculate in a charcoal suit, the vellum fragment and maps tucked into an inner pocket that buttoned with military precision. Inspector Gruber arrived with the dawn patrol, 2 constables in fur-lined greatcoats, their rifles slung like accusations. They brought news. The funicular was indeed buried, but not by avalanche. A deliberate charge of dynamite had severed the cable at the mid-station. Someone wanted the hotel cut off from the world. Sabotage, Gruber growled, stamping snow from his boots. And the radio tower on the ridge, antenna snapped clean. We are blind and deaf. Poirot's moustaches bristled with satisfaction. Then the killer is thorough. But thoroughness leaves traces. Come. He led them first to the greenhouse. The air inside was a humid slap after the corridor's bite. The ravaged rosebed had been tidied in the night, earth raked smooth, broken pots removed. But the soil was still damp, and beneath the central bench, Poirot found what he sought. A shallow trench, no longer than a man's forearm, lined with black plastic. He dug with a trowel and unearthed a metal box the size of a cigar case. Inside, 3 glass ampules of insulin, each labelled 100 units cc, and a folded sheet of onion skin. The sheet was a forgery of Marchmont's will, leaving everything to Dr. Brandt's sanatorium. The signature was perfect, too perfect. Poirot held it to the light. Photostatic copy. The original is elsewhere. Brandt, summoned from the surgery, went the colour of whey. I knew nothing of this. Yet the box was buried beneath your roses, Doctor. Roses you alone tended. Madame Voss, trailing cigarette smoke like a battle, Standard laughed. Geoffrey changed his mind daily. One day the clinic, the next some orphanage in Trieste. He was a child with a checkbook. Colonel Hawke examined the dynamite news with professional interest. Military grade, gelignite. Not easy to come by in peacetime Switzerland. Karl Reiter, leaning in the doorway, said nothing. His eyes were on the mountains, as if he could see through the blizzard to the severed cable. Poirot pocketed the box. We searched the cellars next. The cellars were a warren of stone vaults, once used for smuggling cognac during the Napoleonic Wars. The air smelled of damp and old wine. Poirot's torch picked out cobwebs thick as lace, barrels stamped with the crests of forgotten aristocrats. In the furthest vault, behind a stack of empty crates, they found the sled, a child's toboggan, its runners polished with wax. On the seat, a single crimson petal, frozen stiff. Gruber lifted it reverently. This carried the body. Oui, light enough for one person, strong enough for a corpse. The wax prevented scratches on the parquet. They followed the vault's tunnel upward. It emerged behind the boiler room, steps leading to the service corridor outside Marchmont's suite. The door was locked, but the key was on a nail labelled Keller. Fräulein Keller, when confronted, burst into tears. He asked me to hide the spare, said he didn't trust the staff. I thought it was for the treaty. Poirot patted her shoulder. Calm yourself, mademoiselle. You hid a key, not a corpse. But in Marchmont's suite, the plot thickened. The room had been searched, drawers emptied, mattress slashed, the safe behind the Chagall landscape yawning open. Inside, nothing but a pressed rose, its petals arranged in a perfect circle. On the blotter, a circular stain, insulin residue. And beneath the pillow, a woman's stocking silk, monogrammed Evie Madame Voss, summoned, examined it with theatrical disdain. Mine? Yes, but I left it in the laundry 3 days ago. Someone is playing games. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Games with high stakes. That afternoon, the lights failed. The generator housed in a shed behind the kitchen had been sabotaged, fuel line cut, spark plugs removed. In the sudden darkness, chaos bloomed. SFX generator cough screams. Fräulein Keller stumbled into the lounge, her cheeks slashed, blood bright against her pallor. The White Lady. She was in my room. White gown, no face, roses in her hands. Poirot examined the wound. Shallow, defensive, made by a thorn. On the carpet, flower footprints size 36, leading to the balcony. The French doors were open, snow drifting in. Outside, the prints continued to the balustrade, then vanished. Poirot knelt. Observe, the stride shortens here. The wearer walked backwards into their own prints, then stepped onto something, skis perhaps. He pointed to parallel grooves disappearing down the slope. In Keller's room, the Yifhir ghost had left a calling card. A circle of rose petals on the bed. And in the centre, a single insulin ampule, empty. Under Poirot's ultraviolet lamp, the bedsheet revealed luminous paint in the shape of a woman's face. Featureless, melted. And on the pillow, a fingerprint in fresh blood. Typo, Marchmont's. Colonel Hawke, cleaning his pipe with a penknife, muttered, Staged, but clever. The girl's terrified. Terrified enough to confess? Poirot asked. Keller shook her head violently. I saw her. She whispered my name. Poirot turned to Brant. Doctor, your mother, she died in a fire, yes? At the clinic in Lausanne that Marchmont owned? Brant's hands clenched. He cut corners, faulty wiring. She was trapped in the rose garden when the conservatory exploded. Roses again, Poirot murmured. Always the roses. That evening, Poirot gathered them in the library. The fire crackled. Outside, the blizzard howled like a chorus of the damned. We have lies within lies, he began. The avalanche is a fiction, dynamite, not nature. The ghost is flesh and blood, size 36, with access to luminous paint and insulin. The will is forged, the treaty fragmented. Someone wants us chasing shadows while the real prize vanishes. He held up the metal box. 3 ampules. Enough to kill a regiment of diabetics. But Marchmont received only 1 overdose. Post-mortem to confuse. The true cause of death was exsanguination. Slow bleeding masked by cold. Gruber gasped. You mean he was drained? Like a vineyard in autumn. The puncture in the hand was not injection. It was extraction. A catheter, perhaps, feeding the roses he feared. Madame Voss crossed herself. Monstrous. Monstrous, yes, but logical. The killer needed time. The body must freeze upright, the scene perfect. Insulin shock induces coma. Bleeding ensures death without struggle. The rose was the signature. He turned to Reiter. Herr Guide, you know these tunnels. You smuggled for Marchmont in 1919. Gold, perhaps, or documents. Reiter's eyes were flat. I guide climbers, nothing more. Yet you reported the avalanche. You have a radio. Convenient. The lights flickered. Died. SFX. Generate a final cough. In the darkness, a woman screamed. Not Keller this time, but Madame Voss. When the candles were lit, her room had been ransacked. Her diary missing. On the mirror, written in blood, the White Lady sees all. Poirot examined the blood. Animal from the kitchen. But the message was clear. As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered by the window. In the snow below, fresh prints led from the balcony to the greenhouse, size 36, and returning, a single ski track, deep and purposeful. He smiled grimly. The avalanche was a lie, but the avalanche of truth, it comes. And in the greenhouse, unseen, the last rosebush trembled as if someone had brushed past, its buds tightening like clenched fists. Chapter 4. The Kuwait Insulin Clock. The grandfather clock in the dining room had a voice like a dying monk, each chime a slow, deliberate knell. By 7 that evening, it had struck the half-hour twice, and the hotel's inhabitants gathered under its shadow like penitents awaiting judgment. The storm outside had settled into a steady, murderous fall. Snowflakes the size of communion wafers struck the windows and clung there, turning the glass into a mosaic of white. Inside, the chandelier's electric bulbs flickered, casting the long mahogany table in a sickly amber glow. Poirot stood at the head, his small hands resting on the polished wood as if it were the rail of a ship in heavy seas. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice soft but carrying to the furthest corner. We are prisoners of the mountain and of the truth. Sir Geoffrey Marchmont did not die of cold, nor of poison in the classic sense. He died of time stolen by a clock that was wound too tightly. He placed the broken hypodermic on a silver salver, the bent needle glinting like a fang. 10 cubic centimeters of insulin. Enough to fell an elephant. Yet Dr. Brandt's vial in the surgery remains full to the mark. Therefore, a second supply. Therefore, premeditation. Brandt, seated to Poirot's left, had the pallor of a man who has seen his own autopsy. I keep emergency ampules in the surgery safe. The combination is known only to me. Yet the safe showed scratches, Poirot countered, producing a small magnifying lens. Fresh, made by a left-handed person using a paperclip bent at 30 degrees. Observe. He held the lens over the dial. The scratches formed a tiny telltale arc. Madame Voss, opposite, exhaled a perfect ring of Turkish smoke. Geoffrey injected himself. He was melancholic. The treaty haunted him. Poirot's eyes glittered. No, madame. The puncture is on the left posterior deltoid, a sight impossible for a right-handed man to reach unaided. Someone held him, someone who knew anatomy, and knew his terror. He turned to the corpse, now laid on a sideboard beneath a white sheet. With theatrical care, he folded back the shroud. Marchmont's evening shirt had been cut away. The skin of the upper arm bore a livid bruise shaped like a thumbprint. Restraint. He was unconscious. Chloral hydrate in his cocoa, administered by Fräulein Keller at 10 o'clock. Keller gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. He asked for it, said he couldn't sleep. Précisément, a sleeping draught. But the dose was tripled. You measured it, mademoiselle? I used the bottle on his nightstand. He said it was weaker here. The altitude. Poirot nodded. The bottle now contains chloral and a residue of insulin, mixed to mask the taste. The killer was clever. Colonel Hawke slammed his fist on the table. Then Brandt did it. He's the only one with access to both drugs. Brandt rose, trembling. I examined Sir Geoffrey at 11. He was comatose, but alive. I thought it the chloral. I increased his insulin to counter a suspected hyperglycemic crisis. 5 units, no more. Poirot produced the diary. Yet your entry in the medical log reads 10 units at 23:15. Forged, doctor. The ink is fresh, still tacky under ultraviolet light. He clicked on his pocket lamp. The page glowed ghostly blue, the forgery stark. Brandt sank back, defeated. Poirot continued. The true overdose came later, between midnight and 2. The killer entered via the service corridor, key hidden by Fräulein Keller. Dragged the body on the toboggan from the cellar. Posed it on the terrace. Used ski poles to erase return tracks. The rose, cut from the greenhouse at 1:47 a.m., according to the broken stem's sap coagulation. He held up a stopwatch. I timed it myself. From greenhouse to terrace, 4 minutes, 12 seconds. The killer was practiced. Madame Voss stubbed out her cigarette. But why the rose? Why the legend? Poirot's gaze swept the table. Because Sir Geoffrey believed in the White Lady. In 1928, after his wife's death, he consulted a medium in Geneva. She warned him, when the roses bloom in winter, she will come for you. The killer weaponized superstition. He produced the forged will. This leaves everything to Brandt's clinic, but the original, hidden in Marchmont's boot heel, leaves the estate to a trust for war orphans. The forgery was insurance. If the murder failed, bankruptcy would force the sale. Hawke growled. Then the treaty is the key. Marchmont was selling it to the highest bidder. German rearmament funds. I was sent to stop him. Poirot's eyebrows ascended. MI6, mon colonel. Your credentials are impressive. But you arrived after the murder, too late. Rayter spoke from the shadows. The cache on the map. It's the old smuggler's cave below the glacier. I guided Marchmont there in 19. Gold sovereigns, enough to buy a government. Poirot turned. And you want it back? Rita shrugged. Debts are debts. Suddenly, the chandelier swayed. SFX, crystal tinkling, glass shattering. A window exploded inward, shards flying like shrapnel. A figure in white hurled a rose through the gap, thorns dripping clear liquid, then vanished into the blizzard. The rose landed spinning at Poirot's feet. He caught it by the stem. A droplet fell onto his glove and beaded like mercury. "Insulin! Mon Dieu!" he whispered. "The killer is bold!" Gruber's men rushed to the window, but the snow had already swallowed the tracks. Only the ski grooves remained, arrow straight toward the ridge. Poirot examined the rose under his lens. The thorns had been dipped in a viscous solution, insulin mixed with glycerin to prevent freezing. Lethal to the touch for a diabetic. He turned to the suspects. Someone here tends roses in winter. Someone here knows the exact dose to kill without trace. Someone here is the White Lady. Brandt lunged for the door. Gruber caught him. "I swear, I only wanted the clinic." Madame Voss laughed hysterically. "We all wanted something. Geoffrey was a vault of secrets." Hawkes stared at the broken window. "The storm's worsening. If the killer's out there, they'll freeze." Poirot shook his head. "No, the killer is here." The rose was thrown from the balcony above. Second floor, Madame Voss's suite. The trajectory is unmistakable. Voss paled. "My room was locked." "Yet the balcony connects to the service stairs. And your diary, stolen last night, contained the Paris letters. Blackmail, madame?" She lit another cigarette with shaking fingers. "He ruined me. Acid in my face. I wanted him to suffer." Poirot gathered the evidence. The needle, the rose, the forged will, the diary. The insulin clock ticks. At midnight, the dose was administered. By 2, the body was posed. By dawn, the legend was born. But one detail remains. He held up the ultraviolet lamp. On the dining table, beneath the silver salver, a faint handprint glowed. Left hand insulin residue. Size small, female. Fräulein Keller fainted. As Gruber's men carried her to the sofa, Poirot stared at the broken window. The storm howled like a living thing, but inside, the temperature was dropping. The generator had failed again, this time the fuel line frozen solid. In the flickering candlelight, Poirot addressed the room. "The killer has made their move, but Hercule Poirot has made his. The next stroke is mine." And in the greenhouse, unseen, the last rosebush shed a single petal, blood red against the snow-dusted floor. Chapter 5. Footprints in Reverse. The hotel had become a ship adrift in an endless white sea. By 9 the next morning the storm had not slackened. It had merely changed its voice from scream to whisper. A low, relentless murmur that seeped through every keyhole and made the chandelier crystals hum like tuning forks. The generator was dead, the radiators cold, and the only light came from oil lamps and the fire that Poirot fed with encyclopedic patience. He had not slept. His eyes were bright, his moustaches waxed to razor points, and in his waistcoat pocket the 2 maps, one from the glove, one from the boot, he kept like loaded pistols. Gruber's constables had searched the second-floor balcony at first light. The connecting door to Madame Voss's suite was locked from the inside, the key still in the escutcheon. Yet the snow on the balustrade bore the unmistakable imprint of a woman's heel. Size 36 narrow, the same as the ghost prints from Fräulein Keller's room. The prints led to the edge, then simply stopped. No leap, no rope, no wings. Only a pair of parallel grooves, faint but deliberate, descending the north face at a 45-degree angle. Poirot stood on the balcony, coat collar turned up, scarf wound tight. The cold was a physical weight, pressing the breath from his lungs in silver, plumes. He knelt, brushed snow from the grooves with a gloved finger. "Skis," he murmured. "Narrow, old-fashioned telemarks." The killer walked to the edge in boots, stepped into bindings already positioned, and pushed off. The return was made in reverse. Heels first, poles dragging to obliterate the boot prints. Ingenious. Gruber, behind him, shivered. But the rose last night, thrown from here. The window was 20 meters away. Impossible throw. No, mon ami. A fishing rod. Carbon fiber. Collapsible. The rose was tied to the line, whipped across the gap. The reel was found in the linen cupboard, silk line still wet with insulin. He produced the spool from his pocket, the crimson thread glistening like a vein. They followed the ski tracks down the slope, roped together against the wind. The grooves led to a cleft in the rock face, a smuggler's cache half buried in drift. Inside, a rucksack, a thermos of cocoa still lukewarm, and a single ski pole with a rubber ferrule. The pole's shaft was scratched where it had been used to drag something heavy. On the snow beside it lay a woman's kid glove. Monogrammed I.K. Fräulein Keller, when confronted in the lounge, went the colour of candle wax. I lost it yesterday. I was looking for Sir Geoffrey's papers. Poirot's gaze was gentle but merciless. You ski, mademoiselle? Yes, in Gstaad, as a girl. And you prepared his cocoa every night at 10. She began to weep. He asked for it, said the altitude made him restless. I only added the chloral because he begged me. He couldn't sleep without it. Poirot produced the thermos. This cocoa contains chloral and insulin, enough to fell a horse. You carried it to the cache, waited for the drug to take effect, then dragged him to the terrace on the toboggan. The ski pole erased your tracks, but you forgot the glove. Keller collapsed into a chair, sobbing. I didn't kill him. I only wanted the will changed. He promised me a dowry, then took it back. I thought if he was unconscious, I could search the safe. Gruber cuffed her wrists. Attempted theft. We'll see about the rest. But Poirot was already moving. The discovery of the glove was a red herring, he knew. The true killer had planted it. The ski pole ferrule was new, purchased in Zurich 3 weeks ago, according to the stamped receipt in the rucksack. Keller had been in London then. Back in the hotel, the search intensified. Poirot led them to the attic, a cathedral of dust and forgotten luggage. Beneath a pile of moth-eaten furs, they found a white silk gown, hand-embroidered with tiny roses. The hem was stained with greenhouse soil and something darker, dried blood. In the pocket, a tube of luminous paint and a porcelain half-mask, the features melted as if by fire. Madame Voss, summoned, stared at the gown as if it were a ghost. My mother's wedding dress. I brought it for sentiment. Someone has defiled it. Poirot held the mask to the light. The white lady's face. Porcelain, acid-etched to mimic scars. The killer wore this to terrify Marchmont in his final moments. But the blood on the hem is type O, Marchmont's. The gown was used to wrap the body during transport. Colonel Hawke examined the mask with professional detachment. Theatrical, but effective. The old man was superstitious, as a Breton fisherman. Dr. Brandt, released from suspicion but still pale, added, he had nightmares about the fire, said the roses screamed when they burned. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The roses again, always the roses. That afternoon the dumbwaiter in the service corridor jammed. When the panel was forced, they found Madame Voss's missing diary wedged between floors. Pages had been torn out, but one remained, a photograph pasted to the flyleaf. It showed a younger Voss, unscarred, arm in arm with Marchmont in the Paris of 1925. On the back, in Marchmont's hand, Eleanor, my white lady, forgive me. Voss took the photo with trembling fingers. He threw acid when I threatened to expose the treaty, said I was already dead to him. Poirot turned the page. Beneath the photo, a list in Voss's elegant script, a perfect inventory of the crime. Voss laughed, a sound like breaking ice. Someone frames me. But I was in the lounge when the window broke. Poirot nodded. Oui, you were, but the list is in your hand, and the gown was in your trunk. She went very still. Then search it. They did. Beneath a false bottom, a brass tube 6 inches long sealed with wax. Inside, microfilm. The complete treaty annex, Clause 19b, detailing Marchmont's immunity in exchange for steel shipments to the Reich, worth millions, or a death sentence. Hawke whistled. The real McCoy. London will want this. But Poirot was staring at the wax seal. It bore the imprint of a rose. The same rose that had bloomed in the greenhouse. That night, the temperature plummeted further. The fire in the lounge struggled. Frost feathered the inside of the windows. Poirot gathered them once more. The footprints in reverse were a masterpiece, he said, but masterpieces have signatures. The ski pole ferrule, purchased by Dr. Brandt for his clinic. The luminous paint, medical grade, used for X-ray marking. The porcelain mask, crafted by a Zurich artisan who works exclusively for sanatoria. Brandt rose slowly. You cannot prove. I can. The greenhouse soil contains human albumin, Marchmont's blood, siphoned slowly to feed the roses. The catheter was hidden in the rosebed, still attached to a rubber bulb. You pumped his blood into the roots while he lay comatose, whispering of the White Lady in his ear. Brandt's face collapsed. He killed my mother. The clinic was her dream. He let it burn for insurance. I only wanted him to feel helpless. Gruber moved to arrest him, but Poirot raised a hand. Patience. The doctor is a pawn. The true killer used his grief, his access, his roses. The microfilm was the prize. Someone here intended to sell it and frame the doctor for murder. He turned to the window. Outside, the ski tracks had reappeared, leading toward the hotel this time. Fresh, deep. The killer returns, Poirot whispered, and Hercule Poirot is ready. In the greenhouse, the last rosebush quivered as if breathed upon. A single bud opened, revealing a heart of pure crimson, like a wound that would not close. Chapter 6. The Greenhouse Confession. The greenhouse was a cathedral of glass and steam, its iron ribs black against the blizzard beyond. At midnight, the temperature inside hovered just above freezing, the geothermal pipes hissing like serpents in the dark. Poirot had ordered every lamp extinguished save one. A single hurricane lantern hung from a hook above the ruined rosebed. Its flame painted the leaves in shades of old gold, and the air was thick with the scent of crushed petals and wet earth. The suspects stood in a semicircle, breath pluming, faces lit from below like masks in a morality play. Poirot stood at the centre, the brass microfilm tube in one hand, the porcelain half-mask in the other. Snow sifted through a broken pane overhead, melting on his shoulders like dandrust of the gods. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, voice low, we have chased shadows long enough. The White Lady is no ghost. She is a woman wronged, a man betrayed, a fortune forged in blood and ink. Tonight the roses will speak. He placed the mask on the potting bench. Its melted features caught the light. The eye holes empty, the mouth a scream frozen mid-breath. This was worn by the killer to terrify Sir Geoffrey in his final hour. The luminous paint made her a spectre. The gown, Madame Voss's mother's wedding dress, completed the illusion. But the true horror was intimate. The killer whispered to him as he bled. Dr. Brandt flinched as if struck. I told you, he killed my mother. Oui, but you were not the architect, Doctor. You were the gardener." Poirot gestured to the ravaged bed. Beneath the lantern, the soil had been raked into perfect furrows. He knelt, inserted a trowel, and lifted a clump. From it dangled a length of rubber tubing, the end stained rust-brown, a catheter connected to a bulb pump. While Marchmont lay in chloral coma, the killer siphoned his blood, slowly, ritually, into the roots of the roses he feared. The insulin overdose was administered post-mortem to confuse the timeline. The body was then dragged to the terrace, posed frozen upright by the cold. The rose in his hand was the final flourish. Fräulein Keller whimmed, her cuffed hands trembling. "I only gave the cocoa, précisément, the first domino, but the hand that pushed it belonged to another." Colonel Hawke stepped forward, his face carved from granite. "The microfilm. That's the prize. Marchmont was selling it to Berlin. I was sent to retrieve it." Poirot turned the brass tube in his fingers. "And you did, mon colonel, but not before the killer photographed it. The original is safe in London, delivered by Marchmont's valet 3 days ago. This is a copy, a decoy." He unscrewed the cap. Inside, not film, but a roll of gold sovereigns, each stamped 1919. The real cash, hidden in the treaty tube since the war. Carl Reiter smuggled it across the border for Marchmont. Payment for silence. Reiter's eyes glittered. "He owed me. I only took what was mine." Poirot smiled thinly. "You took more. You planted the dynamite on the funicular. You staged the avalanche lie. You were the distraction." Madame Voss lit a cigarette with deliberate calm. "Then who killed him? The doctor, the secretary, the soldier, the guide, or the woman scorned?" Poirot's gaze settled on her. "All of you, and none of you. The perfect crime is a tapestry, each thread essential, none dominant." He moved to the surviving rosebush, the last intact plant in the greenhouse. Its buds were tight, dark, almost black. With a penknife, he sliced one open. Inside the calyx, a tiny glass vial, no larger than a thimble, filled with crimson liquid. He held it to the light. "Marchmont's blood, preserved in formaldehyde. The killer kept a trophy." Brant lunged, wild-eyed. "Give me that! He deserves to rot!" Gruber restrained him, but Poirot raised a hand. "Patience! The doctor is confessing to the wrong crime." He turned to the group. The murder was collaborative, but the mind behind it was singular. Someone who knew every secret, the treaty, the gold, the roses, the legend. Someone who orchestrated the ghost, the footprints, the forged will. Someone who used each of you as a brushstroke. He produced the inventory list from Voss's diary. This was not a frame-up. It was a script. The killer wrote it in Madame's hand, then planted it to be found. The gown, the skis, the insulin, all props. Hawke frowned. "Then who?" Poirot knelt again, brushed snow from the greenhouse floor. Beneath the bench, a trapdoor, iron-ringed, flush with the tiles. He lifted it. A ladder descended into darkness. The air that rose was warm, fetid, laced with the copper tang of blood. "The smuggler's tunnel," Reiter breathed. "I thought it collapsed." "It was reopened," Poirot said, 3 nights ago, with pick and lantern. The killer worked in secret, moving the body, planting evidence, tending the roses. The tunnel emerges in the boiler room, steps from every suspect's door. He descended. The others followed single file, the lantern casting grotesque shadows on the damp stone walls. 10 meters in, the tunnel widened into a chamber. A camp bed, a Primus stove, a stack of diaries, Marchmont's, Voss's, Brandt's medical log. And on a makeshift table, a portable typewriter, its keys crusted with greenhouse soil. Poirot lifted a sheet from the Platen, typed in perfect German. Act 3. The confession Brandt breaks. Voss accuses. Hawk reveals MI6. Keller weeps. Writer flees with gold. Curtain. Beneath it, in handwriting. Then the little Belgian solves it, but too late. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The killer wrote the ending, but Hercule Poirot prefers improvisation. He turned to the camp bed. Beneath the blanket, a white ski suit, size small, monogrammed IK, but the stitching had been unpicked and resewn by a left-handed person. The boots beside it were size 38, male. Gruber whistled. A disguise within a disguise. Poirot nodded. The killer wore Keller's suit over his own clothes. The boots were padded. The mask completed the illusion, but the left-handed stitches betray him. Brant stared. Then it was Writer. Writer laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. I smuggle gold, not murder millionaires. Poirot shook his head. No, the killer is the one person who could be everywhere and nowhere, who tended the roses daily, who knew the tunnel's every turn, who had access to the typewriter in the manager's office. He turned to the shadows. Step forward, Herr Manager. The game is up. From the darkness emerged a figure none had seen in days. Herr Dietrich, the hotel manager, supposedly in Davos with appendicitis. His face was gaunt, his eyes fever-bright. In his hand, a Luger steady as stone. You are clever, Monsieur Poirot, he said in perfect French, but cleverness dies with its owner. He raised the pistol. Gruber reached for his own, but Poirot was faster. With a flick of the wrist, he hurled the lantern. It struck Dietrich's arm. Oil splashed, flame blossomed. The manager screamed as his sleeve caught fire. Hawker tackled him, the Luger skittering across the stone. Dietrich thrashed, his face contorted. He ruined us. Marchmont bought the hotel in 29, bled it dry, turned it into a vault for his secrets. My wife, my daughter, lost everything. The roses were hers. I made him feed them. Poirot retrieved the pistol. You used Brant's grief, Voss's scars, Hawk's mission, Keller's love, Writer's greed, each a puppet. The ghost was your masterpiece. Dietrich laughed through pain. And the treaty? Safe in London. The gold? Mine. The roses? Immortal. Gruber cuffed him. As they dragged him up the ladder, Poirot paused at the rosebush. He plucked the final bloom, its petals perfect, fed on blood and madness. Even roses, he murmured, wither in the end. Above, the storm began to ease. The first pale hint of dawn touched the glass, and the greenhouse sighed as if released from a long fever. Chapter 7. The Ski Chase. Dawn came like a reluctant witness, pale and thin, slipping between the peaks to stain the snowfields rose gold. The storm had broken in the night, leaving the world scoured clean and silent, except for the creak of ice and the distant groan of settling snow. The Grand Hotel Weissflue stood sentinel, its windows blind with frost, its chimneys exhaling the last of the fire's breath. In the courtyard, Poirot stood in borrowed ski boots, the telemarks narrow and unforgiving, their bindings stiff with age. The brass tube, now revealed to contain only gold sovereigns, was tucked inside his coat, a weight against his heart. Herr Dietrich, the manager, had been locked in the wine cellar, wrists bound with picture cord, his burned arm crudely bandaged by Dr. Brant. The confession had spilled from him like wine from a cracked carboy. The years of resentment, the slow poisoning of the hotel's books, the discovery of Marchmont's cachet in the smuggler's tunnel. The roses had been his wife's legacy. He had made them drink Marchmont's blood to mock the man who had taken everything. But the treaty, the real microfilm, had been slipped into a hollowed ski pole and carried down the mountain by Carl Reiter at 3:12 a.m., timed by the greenhouse clock. Reiter was gone. Poirot had seen the tracks at first light, a single set of ski prints arrowing north across the glacier, deep and purposeful, the pole plants precise. The guide had waited until the confession chaos peaked, then vanished through the boiler room tunnel with the pole and the film. The gold was a decoy. The treaty was the prize. Gruber wanted to wait for the funicular repair crew. Poirot did not. "The glacier moves," he said, adjusting his goggles. "By noon the tracks will be gone, and Reiter knows every crevasse. He will be in Austria by nightfall." Hawke offered to come. Poirot refused. "One man is faster, and I have the grey cells." He pushed off from the courtyard gate, poles digging into the crust. The skis hissed over the new powder, the sound intimate, almost conspiratorial. Behind him, the hotel shrank to a child's toy, then vanished as he crested the first ridge. The air was so cold it burned the lungs, but the sky was a bowl of blue glass, the sun a white coin that gave no warmth. The tracks led down the north face, a vertiginous slope where the snow hid cornices like sleeping dragons. Poirot followed, carving tight Christies, his small body balanced with the precision of a watchmaker. The glacier spread below, a frozen river fractured into seracs and crevasses, the blue ice glowing like veins beneath the surface. Reiter's prints were clear. He had taken the old smuggler's route, a knife-edge traverse that skirted the Weissfluferne. Halfway down, Poirot found the first marker, a crimson rose, frozen stiff, thrust into a snow cairn. A taunt, he plucked it free. The stem was wrapped with microfilm, the real treaty sealed in wax. Reiter had left it as bait, or as a warning. The chase narrowed to a corridor between two ice walls, the snow here wind-scoured to a glassy crust. Poirot's breath came in measured puffs. His thighs burned, but the grey cells sang. He saw the trap before he reached it. A snow bridge over a crevasse, deliberately, weakened, the surface dusted to hide the fracture. Reiter's tracks led straight across. Poirot veered left, traversing the ice wall on edges sharpened to razors. The bridge collapsed behind him with a sound like a cannon shot, the snow plunging into the blue moor below. He did not look back. At the foot of the glacier, the tracks turned east toward the tree line. Here the snow was deeper, the pines heavy with it, their branches bowed like mourners. Poirot unclipped his skis and ran, boots crunching through the crust. The rose's wax seal had left a faint scent of a tar. He followed it like a bloodhound. He found Reiter at the old border hut, a stone bothy half buried in drift. The guide was inside, packing a rucksack with sovereigns, the hollow ski pole disassembled on the table. The microfilm lay beside it, glinting like a snake's eye. Reiter looked up, unsurprised. "You are persistent, little man." Poirot stepped inside, closing the door against the wind. "And you are predictable, mon ami. The treaty for Berlin, the gold for yourself, but you forgot one thing." He held up the rose. "This was never about money. It was about fear. Marchmont's fear, Dietrich's fear, your fear." Reiter's hand moved to the ice axe at his belt. "The film is worth a fortune. Enough to buy a new life." Poirot's eyes never left his. "But not enough to outrun the past. You smuggled for Marchmont in 19. You knew the tunnel. You planted the dynamite. You were Dietrich's legs when his own failed him." Reiter lunged. The axe flashed, but Poirot was already moving, sidestepping with the economy of a bullfighter. The blade buried itself in the table, splintering wood. Poirot drove his shoulder into Reiter's chest, toppling him into the snow outside. They rolled, fists and boots, the guide's strength against the detective's leverage. Reiter's hand found the microfilm. Poirot's found the ice axe. For a moment they were locked, faces inches apart, breath mingling in the cold. "You cannot stop it," Reiter hissed. "The treaty is already sold." "Non," Poirot said, and twisted the axe free. "It is already in London. This," he kicked the film into the snow, "is a copy. The original left with Marchmont's valet. You chased a ghost." Reiter's eyes widened. Then the snow bridge beneath them groaned. The bothy was built on a cornice, the weight of their struggle too much. The ice cracked like gunfire. Reiter scrabbled for purchase, but the cornice sheared away, taking him with it. He screamed once, a sound swallowed by the crevasse, then silence. Poirot lay on the edge, chest heaving. The microfilm copy fluttered in the updraft, then settled on the snow like a white moth. He picked it up, tucked it inside his coat with the rose. The return was slower. The sun was high now, the snow softening to mush. Poirot skied the long traverse back, the hotel growing larger with each turn, its windows winking like eyes that had seen too much. Gruber met him at the gate, face grim. "Reiter?" "Buried with his gold," Poirot said. "The treaty is safe. The killer's tool is broken." Inside, the suspects waited in the lounge. Dietrich sat apart, head in hands. Brandt tended Voss's cigarette burns with salve. Keller wept quietly into a handkerchief. Hawke cleaned his pipe with mechanical precision. Poirot laid the rose on the table. Its petals had thawed, curling like burnt paper. "The chase is over," he said, "but the reckoning begins. Dietrich orchestrated the murder. Reiter executed the theft. Each of you played a part, willing or not. The roses drank blood, but the mountain keeps its own accounts." He turned to the window. The glacier gleamed, serene, hiding its dead. Somewhere deep in its heart, Karl Reiter lay with his sovereigns, the ice his shroud. Poirot raised a cup of chocolate in salute. "To the grey cells, and to the snow, which covers all sins, until it melts." Outside, the first drip of thaw sounded from the eaves. A single note in a symphony that would not end until spring. Chapter 8. The White Lady's Mask. The hotel exhaled. By noon the sky had turned the colour of tarnished pewter, and the thaw began in earnest, slow, deliberate, like a confession. Water dripped from the eaves in steady percussion, carving runnels through the snow on the terrace where Sir Geoffrey Marchmont had sat frozen in his final prayer. Inside, the lounge smelled of wet wool and melted wax. The fire had been stoked high, but the warmth felt provisional, as if the mountain itself might reclaim it at any moment. Poirot stood before the suspects, the porcelain half-mask in his gloved hands. Its melted features caught the firelight and threw it back in sickly ripples. The eye-holes were empty, yet they seemed to watch. He had found it at dawn, wedged behind the boiler in the smuggler's tunnel, wrapped in the blood-stained wedding gown. The mask was cracked now. Gruber's boot had done that when they dragged Dietrich away. But the damage only made it more terrible, like a face broken in a scream. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot said, voice soft as falling ash, "the chase is ended, the thief buried, the treaty safe. Yet the heart of the mystery remains. This mask, this white lady, was the killer's masterpiece. But masterpieces have makers, and makers leave fingerprints." He placed the mask on the mantel beside the crimson rose, now wilted and black at the edges. Porcelain, acid-etched, crafted in Zurich by a man who supplies only sanatoria. The luminous paint is medical grade, used to mark X-rays. The gown belonged to Madame Voss's mother, the skis to Fräulein Keller, the insulin to Dr. Brandt, every prop borrowed, every player cast. But the director? Ah, that is the question. Dietrich had been carried to the surgery, sedated with his own morphine. His confession had been a torrent. The hotel's ruin, the roses, the blood, but gaps remained, details too precise for a man who had not left the premises in a week. Someone had tended the greenhouse after his arrest. Someone had left the final rose on the terrace at sunrise, its thorns still wet with dew. Poirot turned to the group. The mask was worn twice. First in Marchmont's room, to induce terror during the bleeding, second in Fräulein Keller's, to silence her questions, but the third time. He lifted the mask. A hair clung to the inner rim, fine and blonde. This was left for me, a challenge. Keller, wrists bandaged from the cuffs, shook her head violently. I was locked in the pantry all night. Oui, with a guard. Yet the hair is yours, plucked perhaps from your brush. Madame Voss lit a cigarette with fingers that no longer trembled. Then the killer is still among us. Dietrich had an accomplice. Colonel Hawke knocked out his pipe. Or Dietrich lied. Men do, under torture. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Torture? Non, mon colonel. Truth serum, perhaps. His own morphine. But truth has layers, like an onion. Peel one, another waits. He moved to the French doors and threw them open. The terrace was a lake of slush. The wicker chair had been removed, but the depression where it sat remained, a perfect outline in the melting snow. At its centre, a single white rose, freshly cut, its petals edged with frost. Planted at dawn, Poirot said, while we searched the glacier. The greenhouse door was locked, key on Gruber's chain, yet the rose is here. Someone walked through the hotel unseen. Gruber flushed. My men swept every corridor. Every corridor, oui, but not the roof. He led them upstairs, to the attic, then to a dormer window that opened onto the slate tiles. The thaw had cleared a path. Footprints, small, heeled, led to the chimney stack and down the other side to the greenhouse vent. The tiles were slick, treacherous, but the prints were deliberate, the stride of a dancer. Size 36, Poirot murmured, but the weight is wrong. Too heavy for Fräulein Keller. Someone carried a burden. In the greenhouse, the last rosebush was gone, uprooted, the hole filled with fresh earth. Beneath the bench, a tin box. Inside, the missing pages from Madame Voss's diary, each annotated in red ink. At the bottom, a final note. Poirot. Pride. Use mask. Poirot closed the box. The killer scripted us all, but the author is revealed by style. He turned to Dr. Brandt. You tended the roses after Dietrich's arrest. You left the final bloom. You knew the tunnel's every turn. Your mother died in the fire Marchmont caused. But you are not the mind. You are the hand. Brandt's face crumpled. He promised the clinic, then took it back. I only wanted justice. Poirot's gaze shifted to Madame Voss. And you, Madame, provided the gown, the scars, the legend, but your diary pages were torn by someone who knew your hand. Voss smiled, thin and sharp. I was the muse, perhaps, not the murderer. Hawke snorted. Then who? Poirot held up the mask. The one person who could be anywhere, any time, who heard every confidence, saw every key, who locked the greenhouse, then walked the roof in Keller's shoes padded with cotton wool. He turned to the doorway. Step forward, Fräulein Keller. Keller rose, eyes wide. I was guarded. Guarded by Constable Meyer, who drank the cocoa you offered at midnight, laced with chloral, like Marchmont's. He slept 4 hours. You walked the roof, planted the rose, returned before he woke. The hair in the mask, you placed it yourself. She laughed, a sound like breaking bells. Prove it. Poirot produced a ski boot from behind the bench. Inside, a left insole, stained with greenhouse soil, and a perfect thumbprint in blood. Your thumb, mademoiselle, from when you pressed the rose into the snow. The weight was yours, plus the mask, the gown, the vial of blood you carried to feed the final bloom. Keller's face drained of colour. He promised me marriage, then rewrote the will for orphans. I loved him. Poirot's voice was gentle. Love is a dangerous motive, mademoiselle. You used Dietrich's rage, Brandt's grief, Voss's scars. You scripted the ghost, the footprints, the roses. You bled him slowly, whispering of the White Lady, because you were her. She lunged for the greenhouse door, but Gruber was faster. As the cuffs clicked shut, she sagged. The roses, they were meant to bloom forever. Poirot placed the mask over her face. It fit perfectly, the melted porcelain merging with her tears. The White Lady is unmasked, he said, and the snow melts. Outside, the thaw accelerated. Water rushed from the terrace in rivulets, carrying petals and secrets toward the valley below. The mountain, indifferent, began to forget. Chapter 9. The Doctor's Madness. The surgery had become a confessional. Afternoon light, thin and watery, filtered through the frosted window and laid a pallor over everything. The enamel tray of instruments, the morphine ampules glinting like teeth, the porcelain sink stained rust-brown. Dr. Lucas Brandt sat on the examination stool, shoulders hunched, the bandage on his burned arm seeping yellow. The mask lay on the counter between them, cracked but intact, its melted smile fixed in eternal accusation. Poirot stood opposite, hands clasped behind his back, the little Belgian immaculate, despite the night's exertions on the glacier and the morning's revelations on the roof. "Speak, Doctor," Poirot said quietly. "The play is ended. The curtain falls." Brandt's laugh was a dry rasp. "Curtain? No, monsieur. This is the intermission. The real performance begins when the roses drink again." He reached beneath the stool and produced a glass syringe, its plunger already drawn. 10 cubic centimeters of clear fluid, insulin, pure and lethal. "One prick," he whispered, "and the diabetic heart stops like a clock at midnight." Gruber's hand went to his holster, but Poirot raised a finger. "Patience. The doctor wishes to confess." Brandt's eyes were fever-bright. "Confess? I orchestrated a symphony. Dietrich was the baton, Keller the strings, Voss the brass, Hawke the percussion, Reiter the timpani. And Marchmont," his voice cracked. "Marchmont was the soloist who forgot his cue." He stood swaying. "My mother burned in his clinic. Faulty wiring," he said. "Insurance fraud, I discovered. The roses in the conservatory, her pride, caught first. They screamed, 'Monsieur?' I heard them in my dreams for 15 years. Poirot's gaze never wavered. "So you made him scream." Brandt nodded, a puppet with cut strings. "Keller brought the cocoa. Chloral, triple dose. She thought it love. I waited in the service corridor with the catheter. When he slipped into coma, I bled him, slowly, reverently, into the rosebed. 1 liter, over 2 hours. The roots drank like children at the breast." He gestured to the syringe. "The insulin was the encore. Post-mortem, to confuse the coroner. The body was warm enough to freeze upright. The cold did the rest. The White Lady was my mother's dress, luminous paint from the X-ray lab. The mask I etched myself with acid. Her face melted as she melted." Poirot produced the tin box from the greenhouse. "Your script, every player annotated. But Fräulein Keller was the perfect fool," Brandt spat. "She loved him, yes. But she loved the dowry more. I forged the will in her favor, then rewrote it for the orphans. She planted the roses, walked the roof, left the mask for you. She thought she was the author." He lunged suddenly, syringe flashing. Poirot sidestepped. The needle grazed his sleeve, tearing wool but not skin. Gruber fired once, shoulder clean. Brandt spun, blood blooming crimson against his white coat, and crashed into the instrument cabinet. Glass shattered, scalpels clattered like hail. Poirot knelt beside him. "The final act, Doctor. The microfilm." Brant coughed, pink froth at his lips. "Writer took a copy. The original—" He fumbled in his pocket, produced a brass key, safe in the chapel, behind the crucifix, Marchmont's last joke. Gruber retrieved it. A small canister, the film inside pristine. Clause 19B, intact. Brant's eyes glazed. The roses. They'll bloom forever on his grave. Poirot closed the doctor's eyelids with 2 fingers. "Non, mon ami, roses wither, even those fed on madness." They carried Brant to the chapel, laid him on a pew beneath the crucifix. The thaw had reached the stained glass windows. Melted snow ran down the Virgin's cheeks like tears. Poirot placed the wilted crimson rose on Brant's chest. "Requiescat in pace," he murmured. "The symphony is silenced." Outside, the mountain gave up its secrets. The glacier groaned, a low rumble that shook the hotel to its foundations. Ryder's body, gold and all, slid from a crevasse and tumbled into the torrent now rushing through the valley. The sovereigns glinted once in the sunlight, then vanished beneath the foam. In the lounge, the survivors gathered. Keller, wrists recuffed, stared at the floor. Voss smoked in silence, her scars livid in the cold light. Hawke cleaned his pipe with the meticulous care of a man who has seen too many endings. Poirot addressed them. The doctor was the hand, but the mind was fractured. Grief, yes, but madness fed on opportunity. He used each of you, your fears, your desires, your secrets. The White Lady was his mother's ghost, but also his own. He held up the mask, now cradled in a linen cloth. "This will go to the Kantonspolizei. The roses, uprooted, burned, the hotel will close, the mountain will forget." Keller looked up, eyes swollen. "And us?" Poirot's smile was sad. "Justice is not forgetfulness, mademoiselle. It is memory. You will remember every thorn." That evening the funicular crew arrived, their lamps cutting tunnels through the dusk. They brought news, the passes were open, the world returning. Poirot boarded the first car down, the mask in his valise, the treaty film in his breast pocket. As the hotel receded, he saw the greenhouse one last time, its glass panes shattered, the rose beds black earth, the final bloom trampled under boot heels. At the station in Closters, a telegram waited. "Treaty received. Marchmont Valley safe. London grateful." H. Poirot folded it neatly. The grey cells had triumphed, but the taste was ash. In the chapel, unseen, a single petal drifted from Brant's coat and settled on the stone floor. Crimson against grey. The mountain wind found a crack, lifted it, carried it out into the night. The roses were dead, but memory, like snow, lingers. Chapter 10. Thorns of Justice. Spring came to the Weissflue like a verdict. By late April, the snow had retreated to the highest corries, leaving the slopes raw and green, the hotel a scarred monument against the sky. The Grand Hotel Weissflue was shuttered, its windows boarded, its nameplate removed. A notice in 4 languages warned trespassers away. The Kantonspolizei seal gleamed red on the door. The greenhouse was gone, glass hauled away, iron frame melted down, the rose beds bulldozed and sown with Alpine grass. Only the mountain remembered. Hercule Poirot returned on the 1st of May, the funicular creaking up the newly repaired cable. He wore a light grey suit, a white rose in his buttonhole, dyed, not real, and carried a small leather case. Inspector Gruber met him at the station, cap in hand, the broom moustache trimmed for the occasion. "All is finished, monsieur. Brant's body released to his sister in Lausanne. Fräulein Keller sentenced to 8 years. Manslaughter. diminished capacity. Dietrich died in custody. Heart gave out. Voss and Hawke left for London last week. The treaty is in Whitehall. Poirot nodded. And the roses. Burned. Every root. The soil tested. Nothing but earth now. They walked the terrace together. The wicker chair was long gone, but the flagstones still bore a faint outline where Marchmont had sat, a ghost in the stone. Poirot knelt, brushed away pine needles, and placed the white rose in the centre. "Justice," he said, "is not punishment. It is balance." Gruber shifted. "You came back for this?" "No, for the silence." They entered the lounge. The chandelier had been removed, the parquet stripped, but the marble hearth remained. Poirot opened his case and drew forth the porcelain mask, now repaired with fine gold cracks. Kintsugi, the Japanese art of mending with light. He set it on the mantel. "A reminder," he said, "broken things can be beautiful, but they must never kill again." Gruber cleared his throat. "The press calls it The White Snow Murder. Books already. A film, they say." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Let them. The truth is quieter." He produced a second object, the brass treaty tube, empty now, polished to a soft glow. Inside, rolled tight, was a single sheet of vellum, the fragment from Marchmont's glove. Poirot unfolded it beneath the empty chandelier hook. "Clause 19b, he read. "In exchange for steel shipments, Sir Geoffrey Marchmont shall be exempt from all reparations." He folded it again. "A man sold his soul for iron. Others died for the receipt." Gruber watched him. "Will you write the story?" Poirot smiled, small and sad. "Some stories write themselves, in blood, in snow." They descended to the chapel. The pews were gone, the crucifix removed, but the stained-glass Virgin still wept melted snow. Poirot placed the treaty tube at her feet. "For the orphans," he said, "Marchmont's true legacy." Outside, the Alpine meadow was ablaze with gentian and edelweiss. The air smelled of pine and thaw, of endings and beginnings. Poirot paused at the terrace edge, looking down the valley where the torrent roared, white with glacier milk. "Reiter is still there," Gruber said. "They found the gold, the body, too deep." Poirot nodded. "The mountain keeps its own." A train whistle sounded below. The afternoon express to Zurich. Poirot boarded the funicular for the last time. As it descended, he saw the hotel shrink, then vanish behind a shoulder of rock. In his pocket, the pressed crimson petal from the greenhouse, dried flat between pages of his notebook. At Closter Station, a boy sold newspapers. The headline screamed, "White Lady Killer Confesses All. Doctor's Diabolical Roseplot." Poirot bought one, folded it unread, and tucked it beside the petal. On the platform, a woman waited. Madame Voss, veiled in black lace, a single white rose pinned to her lapel. She offered her hand. "Monsieur, you gave me back my face." Poirot bowed over it. "And you gave me the truth, madame. Scars are maps." She smiled, the first genuine one he had seen. "Will you visit Paris? Perhaps, when the roses bloom." The train pulled in. Poirot climbed aboard, the mask in its velvet pouch, the treaty safe in London, the mountain behind him. As the carriage lurched forward, he opened the window. The wind carried the scent of pine and distant snow. In his compartment, he took out the notebook and wrote in his neat, slanted hand, "Case closed. The White Lady rests, but memory is a thorn that never dies." He closed the book, touched the white rose in his buttonhole, and watched the Alps recede, eternal, indifferent, beautiful. At Zurich, a telegram waited on the platform. "Come at once. Stambul. New mystery." Orient Express. Poirot smiled. tucked the crimson petal into the telegram, and boarded the next train east. The snow was gone. The thorns remained.